Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of the Pursuit of Precision podcast. Today, we had the opportunity to interview Nik Banda, the city manager of Rochester, in addition to the economic and community development director. This was an awesome interview, had incredible stories, all different directions that his career went. It was incredible to see how he's been able to get to where he is. You're definitely going to want to tune into this episode. Let's check it out. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Pursuit of Precision podcast. My name is Ryan Jaros, and over the next 12 months, I'm going to be interviewing 50 of the most successful, intelligent, influential, and ultimately happy people as I can in order to hear their story and share with all of you what I learned along the way. So today we have our wonderful guest, Nik Banda. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. We really appreciate the time.
My pleasure, Ryan. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. All right. Well, everybody that is watching this is kind of all over the place and might not know Nik Banda, so we're going to kind of give them the quick spark notes, and then we're going to break it down even further from there.
Okay.
All right, fair enough?
Fair enough.
All right, so Nik has his master's degree in urban planning from Wayne State. He then had 28 years in the city of Southfield as the director of planning, and now, most recently, is the city manager / economic and community development director. That's a mouthful right there for the city of Rochester. Now, there's been a lot that's happened from day one to that quick spurt of your title, where you're at now, and ultimately your experiences that you've had. And so I'm very interested and excited to kind of hear how you got there and kind of break that down. So my first question that I always ask all of my guests are, what does day one look like for you? What was the start for you? What was ground zero? What was before the master's degree, before the 28 years of experience, before your new job that you have now? What did ground zero look like for you?
So it's easy for me. Ground zero was my father. So my dad was a public servant in the city of Dearborn. I'm going to say this probably more than once to you, Ryan. You're too young to know this, but Dearborn was the place to be. It was run by a man named Orville Hubbard, very controversial man, but Dearborn was the place. We're Romanians. Romanians grew up in Dearborn. We had a whole community there. My dad, from the Army, got out with Orville Hubbard and then followed him all the way through. And my dad became a housing director for the city of Dearborn. And people that know anything about Dearborn, it's the premier senior housing place to be if you're a resident of Dearborn. Dearborn's changed so much over the years, but my dad literally started senior housing in the country. Humble man, unbelievable man. I could just see, he would bring me to work before there was bring your kid to work days. He would bring me there, and I would just see all the people loved my father. Extremely humble, a little teeny guy that could speak Lebanese and Maltese and Romanian, talk to anybody at whatever level.
Respected everybody. No matter what.
Doesn't matter what. And it was Ford Motor. So Ford Motor drove Dearborn. So he had to talk to the big boys. So the funding and everything that made Dearborn, I watched him put on a tie and go into a room with billionaires, literally back then even, and then watch him talk to the simplest person in Dearborn. I thought, it's a gift. And all the way through high school, I thought I was kind of quiet. I did my sports and stuff, but I thought, that's a good man.
I was going to ask you when you started picking up on the fact that he was a good man and someone that you did want to lead your life after.
Yep. So probably in junior high school.
Okay.
And he'd say, I'll get you a job in the summer, because he could, but you're going to be a toe checker. A what, Dad? You're going to check the dirt in people's toes at Ten Lake Park in Dearborn. So you're the man. You could give me a job anywhere. No, you're going to be a toe checker. And he made us earn what we did. So we didn't have a whole lot of money, but what we had was, we were family, and he never wavered ever. And I thought, government, I didn't understand exactly what he did, and then he would bring me in. So as I got through high school, I appreciated him more and more and more.
Yeah, but I feel like that's how things go.
I think it does.
The older you get, the more you respect and appreciate the things that people did for you.
And I thought I would not get there that early, but every time I tell a story about my dad, I'm like, I realized at an early age, I'm like, he didn't tell me to do anything. He wasn't tough on us. He was just, you're going to do your own thing. But he led by example, and I just followed that. I think it came to me. But I'll tell you, ground zero is I decided I had to get out of the Dearborn area, because we didn't go anywhere. We didn't have a whole lot of money. We got to go to vacation in Florida once a year, because he got to go look at the Dearborn Towers, and that was our little vacation. So I'm like, I got to go to college. I happened to be a good tennis player, and I played tenor sax. So I rode that. We didn't have a lot of money for college, so I knew I was going to have to pay for my own college. So it was like, I'm going to ride that into something. So I got a full ride at University of Illinois to play the tenor sax. But when you saw back then, this is 1972, if you saw the tuition for that and then the tuition for in-state, I couldn't afford the difference. So I thought, I got to get a scholarship somewhere. So Michigan Tech, I'll play tennis up there. Never been to Michigan Tech. It's in Houghton at the top of the state. The season's about 3 weeks. And I thought, they're not getting a scholarship for that. So, but I had a neighbor across the street that I knew went to college for 9 years. And I said to him one day, he goes, what are you going to do now? You're going to graduate from high school. So all my buddies went to Ford. They went to the Rouge plant, electricians, pipe
Everybody
fitters,
just started working right away.
And they're like, what are you doing? I was the only guy that I knew that went to college.
Wow.
And my mom and dad are like, you're going to the Rouge plant, right, and getting a job? And I'm like, nah, I don't think so. I'm going to go to college.
That's a very interesting point to make to talk about, because obviously there's a lot of younger people that are watching this. So if you could lay the landscape a little bit about why was that the case? Was there not as much opportunity in a lot of the jobs that you could get when going to college, or was it just everybody was so anxious to get working?
So two things, and this is, I got to make sure I don't come across too bad here. So it was Vietnam, and I was 1H. If you went to, so I was 1D, I think they called it. That meant I'm going to Vietnam. And back then there were hippies, and it was Paisleys, and I can't remember the other guys, but you were either a tough guy or you were a Paisley guy, like a hippie guy. And I was more of that. I was more like, I didn't believe in the war. I didn't believe in all that stuff. I knew my dad's a vet. My dad was at Iwo Jima. He was at Normandy in the second wave. So I knew what he stood for. And I'm like, Dad, I don't want to get you mad, but I'm going to go play Canada. I'm going to go play hockey in Canada. I'm not going to Vietnam. And he said, well, then the only way, no, you're not going to do that. So the only other way is you got to get to 1H, which is college. And I'm like, well, okay. So I talked to the neighbor across the street who didn't want to go to Vietnam. He went to college for 9 years, and he bought himself time to not have to go to the Army. 3 guys in my block went to the Army, and 3 guys didn't come back from Vietnam. My neighbors, I remember that. So I think in the back of my mind, it's like, okay, I'm going to go to college, but I got to get away from here. So I picked Michigan Tech. The guy across the street said, I went to Tech. He's an engineering school. Didn't want to be an engineer. What else you got? They have forestry. So you skipped my best degree. I have a bachelor's of forestry. So that's how it all started for me. So I looked at Michigan Tech forestry. What's forestry? I don't know, but I love landscaping and working in the gardens. My grandma was a gardener from Romania, blah, blah, blah. So I said, the farthest point I can go away from my parents in Michigan is Houghton, 600 miles. Didn't have a car.
I know it well.
It's yes, you from hockey, you probably do. So I said, I'm going to go there. Here I take my 80-year-old grandma, my mom and dad. We had never been to Traverse City, let alone the bridge. Get in a car in August, drive all the way to Tech, 12 hours, and go up there. And it's like, this is God's country. What am I doing? And my dad's like, you want to be a forester? Yes, Dad, I do. And he said, okay. So came back home 3 weeks later. They drove me back up one more time, and I started my career there because this all comes back to hockey. John McGinnis was the coach. We were the national championship team at Michigan Tech. Tony Esposito, the famous goalie, he was there the year before I got there, I believe, 2 years. So I thought you had to take gym class. That's what they called it back then. So I got to play hockey under John McGinnis, the greatest college hockey coach of all time, winningest coach. Every day I would play hockey with him. I wasn't good enough to make that team. Yeah. They were all Canadians, and one guy named Scott Jesse from St. Clair Shores. So we had a JV team called the Flying Finns, and we would go play Bowling Green, Ohio State stuff. I wasn't that good, but I got to do all that. So I thought, I can do that. And I love to fish. When we were little kids, every single Saturday morning, your dad had to take you to Camp Dearborn. This is part of his life. And he had to stand at the gate and welcome the people into Camp Dearborn and Milford from the city. And they had a lake right where the guard post, you could see the lake. So they call it the Director's Lake. So the kids were allowed to stand there and fish so your dad could see you right under this big willow tree. I learned how to fish. Fishing is going to be very important in this conversation because that's a big part of my life and what I give back for that. But so I would be with him every Saturday. We'd go out, me and my brother, learn how to bluegill fish and stay there for 2 hours, drive back to Dearborn. So I thought, well, Michigan Tech, look at the fishing, trout fishing, all this stuff. And it was all guys. So when I went up there, I think there were 13 girls, which wasn't so great. So I was in a dorm.
In the whole school?
In the whole college.
Holy
university. It was
smokes.
brutal. And no disrespect, but we call it the women would say it's Michigan Tech's where men were men and so were the women. They were their forearms, and they were all forestry women. There wasn't women in engineering then, so they were foresters. They were tougher than most of the guys. So made some great friends up there doing that. So I thought, I'm going to take that. And I started really getting into it. It was just the whole ecology thing, and I knew I didn't want to be a forester where you're out in the woods measuring trees and doing all this stuff. So I'm a little different. So I met the head of the forestry department. I'm like, there's got to be more to this. Dearborn has this incredible program of street trees and stuff. So they didn't really know what it was, but it was really urban forestry. So on my degree, it just says forestry, but I turned the last 2 years of that program into something called urban forestry, where when I was about to graduate, there were, this is ground zero, no jobs. So Michigan Tech, 98% placed every engineer, every forester for 50 years. In 1976, if you look it up, 0 foresters got a job and 13% of the engineers got a job. The world was just crashed at that time. So we were all like graduating. We have all this debt relative compared to now.
Yeah.
Not good. But for us, that was everything I had. I didn't get a car until I was a senior in college. I had to hitchhike home from Michigan Tech to here because couldn't afford a car. Another story. So we
that's important. There's so many different things I want to jump in here.
You stop me whenever you want to go to a different one.
You're good. But the biggest thing that I notice in this whole thing is, again, someone looks at someone that's been in the career for 28 years and had the experience that you've had, would maybe think, oh, he knew what he was doing the whole time.
Heck no.
Right? And it's very clear that you were ultimately doing what you had to do based on the circumstances that you were put in. And ultimately that kind of led you to where you were going. But most importantly, what I want people to take away is that you didn't just sit around and do nothing. You took action for every single step along the way.
And that's probably, when I talked to you, I said, I now take great pride in going to elementary schools, junior highs, college classes. I was at Lawrence Tech and at OU as an adjunct just to help to do this. I call my career the waggle dance. So that means when bees come back from pollen, they come to the hive and they do this thing called the waggle dance. They move around and the other bees know to do that to get to the pollinating source. So my whole career has been like, I didn't know where I was going to get to. I didn't know where the flowers were, but I knew I was going to have to waggle. Once I did, I made sure I knew where I came from. And then I wanted to help others figure out, you're not going to get there in a straight line. Mine is so not straight line. I've been doing this 45 years altogether in government. It's crazy.
I think that's incredibly valuable for, especially, it's so relevant to today, because I think there's almost what I'm seeing, and this is just coming from a different generation, is I think there's so much information out there and there's so many things you could do that it paralyzes people and it puts them in a place where they stop doing things, right? There's everybody telling you, do this, this is how you do it. For you guys, it was more figured out.
Exactly.
And a lot of survival, right? And so I think there's a lot to be learned in that, and something that young people watching should just start taking some action, because at the end of the day, you sitting around thinking about what you're going to do is not going to get you to where, at least start figuring out where you're going to end up.
And if we put this into a 10-minute conversation, it's going to be that. If you think somebody else is going to get you where you have to get to, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
So my story, it could take 3 hours getting where I'm going to get to, but I can condense it. But I can tell you that all along the line, I was scared because I'm thinking, I got to feed myself. I had to move back in my parents' basement.
Yeah.
You didn't do that in 1976. And when I come home, the first summer I came home, all my buddies are driving red Vets.
Because they're all working, right?
Dude, how was college? It was great. And there's no girls, right? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm dating Doris Lipson, and I'm driving a red Vet. And I said, and you go to the Rouge Plant every day? Yep. Yeah. We'll see how you are in 4 years, Nick. So at the end of 4 years, kept those same friends. So how much in debt are you? $15,000. And they're like, I have 3 cars now, and I'm married and I have a kid. I'm like, then you start wondering, oh, man.
Did I do the right thing?
How far did I set myself back, right? Yeah. And then you get no job. I remember standing at the podium when they call your name. Tech was small. There's only, I think, 32 forestry people. And I remember standing up with my buddy Vic, who was in engineering, and we looked at each other. Our dads stand next to each other, and they said, you guys don't have jobs, do you? It's like, I didn't even tell my parents I couldn't find a job. It was 1976. Jimmy Carter, I think, was the president. And here's why I remember that. I'm like, I'll do anything. I got to find a job. How am I going to feed myself? I had a Pinto wagon car that, long story how I got that, but I got this Pinto wagon, and I thought, I got to do something. I don't know what. My mom was a real estate agent, the most famous woman realtor in Dearborn. My mom was the office manager.
Okay.
She's like, you're going to get a real estate degree. You got the gift of gab. You could do good. Men really didn't do it. Back then it was women. I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. And my dad's like, you got to make some money somewhere, son. So it's like, nah, you know what I'm good at? I'm good at physical labor. So I literally stood at the podium, looked at Vic, and go, what are we going to do? He's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going home and I'll figure it out. And I came home not very happy, thinking, could have felt sorry for myself. I remember moving in my own room, like, nope, I'm going down the basement. My dad had finished the basement. And I said, I'm not.
And this is right after you've graduated.
1976. And literally my first day home, I'm in the basement, I'm moving down here. And I know what I'm doing. I called this guy my godfather. He wasn't, Teddy Coutura, big figure in Dearborn, just a gentleman. He called me Nico. Nico, you're a hard worker. He said, I will make sure that you can make enough money to live, but you're going to earn every dime. So I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to paint my silver octopus my furnace down my basement on Harrison Road. I'll pay you like $200. And this was cash back then. That was like a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's going to take you a week to do it, this silver paint. And I'm like, what do you need that? It's in your basement. He goes, you want to make $200? Okay.
Yeah.
Then he'd say, do you want to wax my car? So back then it was something called Blue Diamond, Black Diamond. I think it was Blue Diamond. So I would charge $90 to wax somebody's car. It took 7 hours to wax your car. So you'd put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off. There were no buffers. You did it by hand. So I would do that. Then he's like, would you like to take care of my landscaping? Sure. So then I dig out all his bushes.
Who was this man?
It was my dad's best friend, but I called him Uncle Teddy.
So he obviously did very well, correct?
He did. I never knew what he did, to be honest with you. He was like the godfather.
Yeah.
Sure what he did.
Yeah.
He lived, and he was probably 80 years old at the time.
Okay.
So he would keep me busy. He said, all right, you can cut the grass. You want to re-landscape my house? And this is like old Dearborn houses. I'm like, sure. So I kept doing that. Every day I'd go work 8 hours for him. And then the neighbors would see me and they'd say, can you landscape my house? I'm like, sure. So I thought, oh boy, this is what I'm going to do now. I got to, and then I saw this thing. I got a recruiter, not a recruiter, but a counselor called me from Michigan Tech and said, we feel horrible. Nobody got a job. And there's an opportunity for this thing called the Bureau of Outdoor Recreation. They're going to do a study over the summer to figure out the next 20 years of needs of the American people in the Midwest on recreation. You want to be on that team. I'm in. How much does it pay? Like $100 a week. Okay. You're on a team of 5. So it was the landscape architect of Yellowstone National Park. It was Susan Drake was the landscape architect for U of M. It was 3 other guys that were all these famous architect landscape recreation guys. And I'm like, they're all old. And so they put me on this team. I still in my office. My office is kind of like a museum. I have all these keepsakes.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later. But I have a little box from Jimmy Carter where he had peanuts, right? So it's a little box of peanuts it's the peanut starter kit, the Jimmy Carter starter kit. So I went there for 3 months. We drove around every day. I made enough money to buy a motorcycle. So I bought a Honda 554, drove to Ann Arbor every day down North Territorial Road, got out there. We'd go with these guys and we drive around Southeast Michigan and just stop people and say, what's your recreational needs? The book's about that thick. I still have it, what we did these surveys.
Yeah.
And saw people at Belle Isle. A guy dropped over dead while I was interviewing him, literally had a heart attack because he caught this big carp in the Detroit River, and we had to revive him. All these wild stories, meeting the coolest people. And then they put the book out, and it's like, there's no more job for you. And that lasted all summer of 76.
So they ultimately had you collect all the data and do all the research, and then you were done?
So they said, but we got one potential for you. There's the city of Minneapolis started this urban forestry division, and they have the greatest park. So that and a city called Cassopolis, which is down by Kalamazoo.
Okay.
We didn't have cell phones and stuff, so it's like there's jobs in these 2 cities. So I went to Cassopolis, and it's all black community, and they're like, you're from Dearborn, and you want a job here? And I'm like, look at me, I'm Romaine. You don't know what I am. It's fun. So they decided, they said, no, you're too young. So then Minneapolis calls. I literally had to pay, I remember, like $79 to get on a flight to go to Minneapolis. I walk in the room. I didn't have a shirt and tie, and I didn't know anything. I thought it's a forestry job. And it turns out they walked in. They're like, where's your shirt and tie? I'm like, oh, boy, I'm not sure why I'm here. It was the director of the city of Minneapolis Parks and Rec job. It was like $80,000. And I was making like $5 an hour. I'm like, They go, wait, you don't have to leave. I said, oh my God, this is a misunderstanding. I'm embarrassed to even be here. They're like, no, you're here for a reason. Sit down. Went through this interview for 8 hours with these people. They treated me like the nicest guy in here. I'm 21, 22 years old. And
oh my goodness.
They looked at me and said, we can't give you this job. And I don't think you can afford to live in Minneapolis right now. But son, this would be the best job you never got. And I remember that in my brain, like, I didn't feel like that because I was just out the money to get here.
Yeah.
And I went home and I thought, crap. Hey, Mom, I'm going to get a real estate degree. She's like, okay, or real estate license. She said, all right, you got to go to this school, Sharp School of Real Estate in Garden City. Okay. So I knew how to study. So when I went to Michigan Tech, you could, and this is relevant, you could take your core classes, 13 hours, and then anything up to 21 hours, you could take those classes and pay $0 per credit hour if you passed them. If you failed them, a D or less, then you would have to pay. So I took 21 hours from freshman year to my senior year. I took all 21 hours, never failed them, and most of it was engineering, just in case I was going to get stuck being an engineer. Part of that was drafting and all this good stuff. So I knew I didn't want to be an engineer, but I had that in my back pocket. So we get done, and I go to the school. I knew how to study. I memorized. So I remember being in the room taking the test, and they said, okay, everybody that's been here one time before, raise your hand. There's probably 200 people in the room. Everybody that's been here 2 times, 3 times, and hands are going up. I'm like, how hard can this be? And one lady, 13th time, literally, I'm not exaggerating, taking the test. And I thought, oh, God, I'm going to fail. All she needed was 75 to pass. I got 93, I think. Went back to Marion Jones, I think her name was. I said, I got my real estate degree. Okay, well, you're lucky today. You go to St. Peter and Paul Church and St. George's in Dearborn, and they need to sell a piece of property. So I'm going to give you that lead. So back then, that would have been like getting a listing.
And so this is for, what company is this?
So I think it was, it's so long, Century something. It wasn't Century 21, but it was a real estate company, a woman-owned company.
So how did you get your job after getting the degree initially? Is that part of it?
Nope. So I just knew when I got back from the Bureau of Outdoor Recreation, I couldn't find a job in forestry. So I thought, I got to make money. I've got to do whatever I have to just feed myself. So I went to her, and I thought, I might be good at this. Forget college for right now. I'm going to do this. I went in there, and my very first day, she sent me to the Father Surdu Khan at the church, and he said, we already got a buyer for this, so you get the commission. This is a guy that made $0, $13,375. I got, in 1 minute, I just had him sign, and I got that check, and I'm like, I'm a real estate tycoon. I came in that afternoon, I go, she knew it. She knew what was going to happen. I said, I'm rich, man. This is great. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. She's like, no, you'll be in tomorrow, and you're going to open the white pages and call numbers and ask them if they want to list their house.
Yeah.
And I looked at my mom. My mom's, that's what we do. Okay, I'm done with real estate. Literally, 1 day career.
Wow.
Never came back. I thought, I got to keep going. So then I went back to my Uncle Teddy. Like, what else can I do? And I just kept doing these little jobs.
I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry, just for a quick second here. So very, very important. What I'm seeing is no matter what happened, no matter what position you were in, there was never an option to fail. And so my question for you, because I think you're underplaying it a little bit. Obviously, you went through a ton of adversity and continued to keep pushing forward and continue to figure out a way to feed yourself, as you keep referring to. For some people out there, they might, unfortunately, not take those actions, not take those steps. What would be your advice, or what did you do why were you so motivated continually to keep figuring out a way to make it happen?
So I think that's fair. So there's 2 things you can do. You can envy yourself or pity yourself.
Yeah.
Or you could envy others, bad word, or pity others. So I watched all my buddies making all this money, and I thought, I'm going to prove to them I don't have to take their journey and be a plumber or electrician or a pipe fitter. And I don't know why, but when I look back, it's like, I think that drove me. Like, I'm going to figure this out somehow. I have no clue where I'm getting to. And
so you almost had a desire to do it your way versus just
correct.
Following what everybody else is, even though it wouldn't be you.
My best friend's like, I can get you a job at the plant. This is 2 years out. And I'm like, he's like, Nick, why are you making, I was lucky I didn't have to pay rent at my parents. So I thought, I got to get out of here though. And then I thought, what else do I know? I know tennis. So I became the City of Dearborn's tennis pro. I got to play against Ilya Nastase.
And this is right after 77. Real estate.
Yep. So real estate done. Guy named, never forget this guy, Joe Hamway, owned Big Bill's sports store.
Okay.
It's not a big deal. Big Bill was Lebanese. Big Bill was the godfather of Southeast Michigan. Nobody knew. I didn't know that. He knew me and knew his son was Steve. You ever hear the name Steve Gordon? Signature Associates. Okay, Steve is the man. That's Uncle Joe's nephew. So Steve was a wild man. We used to tie him up and put him in, he hates when I tell this story, put him in boxes and ship him down the chutes to ship him off in a truck somewhere. Steve Gordon. And I always tell the story to embarrass him when I see him. So he said, I think I could get you a job. My dad knew the other partner, Leonard Bloom. We think we can get you a job there. Stringing rackets. I'm like, I'll do whatever I got to do.
Yeah.
Stringing rackets got me people saying, so how do you know how to string a racket? Well, I was a tennis pro. Okay. So, and I played in college and all this stuff. So then I started teaching. And then what you talk about, when I would teach somebody's kid tennis or their wife, so back then things were a little wilder. So there was all kinds of fun stuff, but teaching them tennis, I would meet somebody that would say, well, you seem like you're a go-getter. Maybe I know somebody that might get you a job.
So you
I kept
started
thinking,
use it as a networking.
Correct. And back before there was networking, I thought, I'm going to be humble and somebody's going to see me and give me a break. And Mr. Hamway would say, don't quit this job, Nick. I know you got a college degree. Just keep stringing rackets. Someone will pick you up. I know they will. So that went on for about a year and a half, but I kept.
But that's genius. And I want to hit on this real quick because a lot of times, so I think back even to myself, and I was still doing this. I was doing something similar to you. I worked at a nice golf course where I'd be talking to people that I knew just spoke at a different level and carried themselves in a specific way and potentially would be able to get me a job or connect me with someone that would be able to get me to a job. So I think it's very important for people to understand that you might not be working the most glamorous job at the time, but it was more about the long-term gain that you saw if you started dealing with the right types of people and the right opportunity would present itself.
That's exactly correct. And I could see it right in front of my face. It's like, I got to be careful not to get in trouble here by going crossing the line sometimes, but I would meet a state cop and then he would know somebody that did this. And then everything came back kind of my dad. I couldn't figure out what I could do, how he did it.
But you could see the value in with people. Mm-hmm. Is that a lot of what it was?
Absolutely. It was all about make sure my dad forget agreements, handshake. Nick, never, ever lose the fact that is all that matters. Yep. People like us, he would say, that are going to have the same values and they care about hard work. Bust your butt and stop. Don't be a whiner. And I know you thought you're going to get a great job out of college. You didn't even know what you wanted to be when you got out of college, Nick. So keep morphing around and you'll figure it out, son. Okay. My mom would get frustrated. Like, you can sell real estate. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah. So I think
that's huge though. You sticking to the fact that I'm going to follow my own path and find my own way and staying true to you, I think is very important because you didn't just sell out and do whatever everybody else did just to make everybody happy because it wouldn't have made you happy in the end.
Right. And you know what's funny? I'm a minute thinker. I literally live my life in seconds in intervals to this day. I'm 69 years old and I still don't have a plan. Never did. And I'm not ashamed of it. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, but I think if you think you're going to have a plan, there's a better chance you're going to fail. If you think I'm getting there, it's almost impossible. Now I wouldn't want to be 20 years old. Look, my son, he's 31 years old. He's a surgeon and he's still trying to find that next, what he's going to do from 31 to 50, right? Yeah. And I'm thinking, back then it was simpler. You could just get a job, manual labor. You could do whatever you want. And I thought, nah, I'm not. I knew in my back of my brain, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to know it when I see it. That's all I kept remembering. And somebody's going to recognize me. And I'm going to show them how hard I work and be honest and do the right thing, and I'll get a job. And it gets wonkier because I met a woman that she was a banker and she had been married before. Everything I didn't stand for, she didn't. And we're still best friends. And I ended up marrying her. I went out with her sister, who was Miss Michigan, because I was kind of a wild man. And somehow, I won't even go into that story because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I ended up with the older sister who was back then it was.
And this is still where you were working at that shop.
Yes.
Correct.
Yep. At Big Bill. So I met her and I'm like, I'm a tennis rec. I'm a tennis pro, whatever. And she had money and whatever. So we ended up getting married, and that's the most fun story of my whole life. But best friends today, didn't stay married for 2 weeks, whatever it was. It wasn't very long. But what she did do is she made enough money that let me do what I wanted to do. And she's like, I think, Nick, you're going to make it someday. And to this day, we're still best friends. We have a daughter. My daughter, Jamie, We were probably legally we were married like 3 years, we think.
Okay.
But we knew that we weren't going to stay married the day we got married. But she was like, hey, you know what? You're an honest guy. You work hard. And her family's great. And they always support me. And they would give me odd jobs to make money to do whatever. And then one day I thought, you know what? I got to get a real job. And this is the second most important thing to me. I just told my son this weekend. So I started looking in the paper. Back then, you look in the want ads. And I saw this job at Mooney Press. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. And it was on 8 Mile. And I walked into this guy's office, and the job was in the parts division to be the manager of the parts division in this little shop that supported stuff that went to the auto industry. And I walked in, and the guy said, looks at my, back then, I don't even know if you call it a resume. He said, so you went to college? What are you doing here? It's like, I got to get a job. And I'll work hard for you. I have this incredible memory, which I'm lucky I still do. And I can memorize every part in this place, and I'll be the best you ever had. I'll take care. I promise you, you won't be sad that you hired me. And it's the second time I heard this, he looks at me and goes, you want to work here for like $7.85 an hour. But I really could use somebody like you, but this is going to be the best job you never got. Second time I hear this in 3 years. I'm
Interesting.
Like, oh, man, come on. He's like, no, Nick, no, you're going to thank me. Thought, all right, that's it. I'm not giving up. So I kept looking, and there was this job. It said cartographer. I'm sorry. I jumped ahead. It was a draftsman in Northville. Didn't know where Northville was. Knew I drove through it to get to Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I talked to Karen, my wife, and I said, you know, I'm gonna try this job. I can draft. I learned at Michigan Tech. That's why I told you about the extra hours. I took a lot of drafting. Back then, drafting was backhand 60 degrees and art. I was really good at it. So I remember going into this place called McNeely and Mosier and Associates on the second floor of Long's Plumbing in downtown Northville. I walked in and I said, Mr. Mosier, he was a military guy, short hair, engineer supreme. He's like, what are you doing here? I said, well, I think I can do this job. What have you been doing for 2 years? I'm a tennis pro. I'm waxing cars. And he goes,
doing it all.
And he looks at me and goes, no, this is an 8 to 5 job, and you're going to draft. Just sit here and draft. I'm like, I said, do you have any vellum? And he looked at me, he goes, you know, vellum? I said, that's how I learned on vellum, which is this, it's like it's a special paper you use with special rapidograph pens that if you didn't know what it was, you didn't never hear it before.
Yeah.
He goes, you can draft with ink. I'm like, oh yeah. So he said, sit down. So he said, write the alphabet right now in front of me. So I did, perfect 60-degree backslide. He's like, I'll hire you right now. And I said, he goes, this is a full-time job. I'm going to give you benefits, everything. I'm like, this. So we shook hands. 2 days later, that was on Friday. I started on Monday. And I owe that guy. I went in there every single day and sat there. And he billed by the hour. And I think the first 3 months, right? I'm not making this up. I sat there and did the alphabet, and I memorized all the capitals of each state, how to spell everything, because he said, you're going to do it until I know you're never going to make a mistake. So it took 3 months. And he'd come over and he'd smoke a cigar and he'd get juice on the vellum. I'm like, Mr. Mosier, you just wrecked everything I did. He's like, don't worry about it. You're not ready yet. 3 months later, he looked at me and goes, okay, here's your first real job that I'm going to bill for.
So were you not getting paid those 3 months?
I was getting paid, but not what I would get paid if I became a real draftsman. He wanted me to prove that.
So why? So to answer me this.
Why didn't I give up?
Why did you stick around for 3 months at that job versus everything else you experienced previously?
Something told me that this guy knew a lot of people, and the discipline of coming to work every day instead of being a wild man, that I think this is going to help me someday. And my dad, when I told him what I was doing, he's like, okay, there's other jobs in that field. You don't have to be an engineer. And I didn't know what he meant by then, but I'll get there in 2 seconds. So I kept drafting. Mr. Mosier decides, Mr. Mosier Sr., the oldest living land surveyor, he said, Nick, you went to Tech? You know how to survey? I'm like, I do, sir. He goes, I'm going to put you in the field too. So now he let me go. He had registered surveyors. I wasn't one. He let me go with them in the field. And I was probably 2 months in the summer. It was hot, and we were doing all kinds of cool stuff. And then he's like, you're going to be an engineer. You should be a surveyor and engineer. I'm like, I have a degree in forestry. He's like, forestry. And they didn't even talk to me about that.
Yeah.
And this is the coolest thing. So this is 1978. He got a job from Northville for to this day, the Northville psychiatric ward is still a thing in Northville. It's this big hospital that was there for mentally ill people. and it was 108 acres, and he got the job to survey it. And the guy that was buying the property wanted to know what every single tree was on this property. 2,013 trees. And he wanted to know, it's like, why? This guy was Chinese, and he wanted to know, he noticed species on this property, which seems irrelevant, but, and they're like, do you think you could figure out all these trees? These are exotic trees, and you have to go measure them. We do an engineering point, and then we're going to draft them. And I'm like, this would be great. I can use my forestry degree. So I happen to memorize 2,000 trees characteristics. So every tree had 9 characteristics, and I could remember that. So I would go out there, and they had a young guy named Wally Alex. He would take me out there, and he'd say, all right, what kind of tree is that? We'd measure it. I figured out it was a chinkapin from China, which shouldn't have been in the United States. Found a female ginkgo tree. Illegal. Can't have those in the United States because the fruit will kill you. Found one of those. So I write all this stuff down, spent 3 months, then it took me 6 months to draft.
And this is all with the same company that you're initially just practicing with.
Yep, Lincoln McNeely and, Mosier & Associates. Mr. Mosier Sr. dies. His best friend was Mr. Lincoln, who was the second oldest living surveyor. They merged the companies. He said, Nick, I want you to stay. These 3 guys were all engineers, and they're like, dude, you're not even an engineer. But I'm drafting. Now I'm doing road drawings and engineering, but I can't sign them. So I'm going to skip this part because they hired some guy to sign what I drafted. Probably shouldn't have. In this day and age, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So I would draft them, he would sign them, and then they would submit them to the city. So technically, we are the city engineer in Northville, the township engineer. So he's like, you're kind of like a city employee, Nick. I remember him saying that. I thought, I'm working for you. He's like, well, we're the city engineers. Okay. Then Mr. Lincoln died, and then Wally Alex's dad, Neary, there's the 3 living oldest surveyors. They all were together. All of them passed away. Wally takes over the company. He's like, Nick, you got to do something better than this. I get it. I don't want to see you just grinding this out the rest of your life because you're going to be a surveyor. Let's take it one step. Let's go get your engineering degree. Oh, I don't want to be an engineer. Still married to Karen. I call Karen my practice wife. So this is just my practice wife. I'll do something else with my life. And they're like, so I called her. I said, what do you think? They want me to be an engineer. And it was going to be a jump in pay from like $13,000 to $30,000. So I got my resume and my transcripts from college, and I got in the car, and Mr. Jack McNeely said, go to Lawrence Tech. I called them, go in there. You're going to sign up. You need 7 more classes, and you'll have your degree in engineering, and then you can be a registered engineer, and we can make more money after.
Because you already took so many in the first place.
Right. So I'm like, okay. So here I go. I'm driving to Lawrence Tech in Southfield. Didn't know where it was. My Uncle George, big time salesman in the auto industry, lived in Southfield. That's all I knew about Southfield. And I knew my cousin Patricia's husband, Mark, worked for the city of Southfield. My dad was Dearborn, Southfield. I knew my Uncle George lived in Southfield, didn't know anything about Southfield. So I'm on the way there. I get a flat tire. So I go to a payphone and call Karen and said, I got a flat tire. I'm supposed to go to Lawrence Tech. Could you call them and tell them that I'm going to be late? She said, well, you know what? I just saw another job. While you're in Southfield, the city of Southfield's hiring somebody called a cartographer. What's that? She goes, it's a draftsman. She goes, doesn't your dad's Dearborn? Maybe you know somebody in Southfield. While you're there, why don't you go there? So I skipped Lawrence Tech, went right to Southfield, went in the basement. A guy named John Perkowski and Bob Hank were in the basement. I went down to the HR department and said, hey, is there a job here for a cartographer? And the lady looked at me, Val Crump, looked at me and said, no, that closed like a week ago. Okay. And I see this guy coming down the hall, smoking a cigarette because you could back then. And he's like, Ricky Ticky Dick. And he's like, I'll try to source, son of a gun. The guy who was going to interview for the cartographer job just canceled. And I stood there, and Val looks at me and she goes, what, is that the job you were going to go for? I'm like, yeah. She goes, let me see your transcripts. I looked at it and she goes, okay, John, why don't you take him upstairs? I go upstairs with John and Bob. Was there 3 minutes? They looked at me and they go, what are you nuts? You're like pretty wound up right now. I said, I was going to Lawrence Tech to become an engineer. Literally, I'm on my way there, and I saw this. My dad works for the city of Dearborn. Who's your dad? My dad's Simon Banda. Your dad's Simon Banda. Hang on. They walked next door to a guy named Don Gross. Don Gross is a legendary planner. He was the oldest planner ever. I mean, the longest serving planner in Michigan for the city of Southfield. Built that place from the 60s all the way through the 70s. So I walked in, they go, he's like, who are you? And this is the story I tell to all the kids. I said, name's Nik Banda. Your dad's Simon Banda? It is. Whoa, man, your dad's like a legend. I'm like, I didn't even know anybody knew my dad because my dad was so quiet. And he's like, so what are you doing here? I said, on my way to Lawrence Tech. And he goes, why would you come here? I said, well, it says cartographer. He goes, can you draft? I'm like, yeah, I can draft very well. He said, so this might be kind of boring because it's like putting zoning maps together and all that stuff. I'm like, okay. And past the door walks my cousin's husband, Mark. And he's like, hey, what are you doing here? I'm like, I know you're an engineer. He's like, I'm an engineering inspector. He said, let me talk to you for a minute. So Don, excuse me. I went out and he goes, you know why I'm here? They have these things called pensions. And if I stay here long enough, I'm set. I'm not going to make a lot of money, but this is a great place to work. Walk back into Don. He's like, so you're not even supposed to be here, but I'm going to do a 1-question interview with you. And he was sitting at a desk. I was sitting here. He had his feet up on the desk, smoking a pipe, because you could back then. And he said, so what are you going to be doing in 10 years? And I have this weird ability to, and you're not going to believe me, but when I'm talking, I'm like on a millisecond delay. So I can usually stop myself from saying something before I'm going to say it, even though I don't a lot. So I looked at, I thought, I'm going to get thrown out of this office or I'm going to get a job. And I looked at him and I go, I'll be sitting in your seat in 10 years. And he looks at me, he starts laughing. He puffs on his pipe. He goes, dude, he called me dude. You didn't say dude back then. He goes, dude, you don't even have a planning degree. I'm the highest there is in planning. Just get out of my office. I'm like, well, that didn't go well. Walked out, decided not to go back to Lawrence Tech, went back to McNeely and said, I don't know what I want to do. And by the time I got back to the office, the secretary Maureen handed me the phone. She goes, guy's calling you from Southfield. I'm like, uh-oh. And it was Don. He's like, I want you to come work for me. And I'll even match what you're making at the engineering company. It's like, it didn't pay the same. I said, okay, well, you got to start Monday. So I went to Mr. Jack McNeely and said, you sent me to Lawrence Tech. I didn't make it there. I went to Southfield and I got to leave you. And he's like, we've been banking on it. It was horrible. I ripped my heart. He said, but I remember him looking at me saying, you know what? I know what your dad does. And if you can get into government, Nick, that's probably a really good move. Things were still horrible in the economy. He said, so I'm going to let you go, but will you moonlight for me as long as you can? I don't sleep much, so can you keep moonlighting? So I agreed to do that for like 6 months with them. And I went to work for Don. I was in there. Am I okay going on the story? Because this will.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I'm there 2 days. I started on a Wednesday, I think. Friday, I said, can I have the half a day off? And Don's like, you just started. I'm like, I got to go down to Wayne State. And he's like, for what? And I said, well, I see on your wall you got a planning degree, a master's from Wayne State. I got to get one. And he's like, so he laughed. And he didn't think I was serious. So I said, no, serious. Can I come in at noon? Fine. So I drove down to Wayne State, didn't even know where it was. Remember parking there, went out, and there's a guy named George Hanzatko, was the head of the urban planning division. The chairman of the school was a guy named Dr. George Perles. Not Perlis, but Perles. Perles. So I did a little research as fast as I could, and I remember walking in there, and Mr. Hanzatko was sitting there. They all used to smoke pipes and stuff. So I walked in, the secretary's like, can I help you? I said, well, I would like to apply to get a master's in planning. Oh, great. Let's see your transcripts. She goes, you have a degree in forestry? Yes, ma'am. Wow. You want to get a bachelor's in planning? No, ma'am, I need to get a master's. Like, why? I said, it's a long story. I got to get a master's like right now. And I'm not cocky, but I was pushy. So I just said, can I talk to him? She's like, you don't have an appointment. I'm like, well, then I really want to talk to him, the director, the doctor, the chairman. She's like, you can't. So this was a little forward. I walked around her desk. He's in there smoking a pipe, opened the door, and she's like, I tried to stop this kid. And he goes, what are you doing? I said, you're the head of the department. I got to get a master's in planning. I told this at his funeral. I told this story to his widow. And he said, who are you? My name's Nik Banda. Your dad, Simon Banda? I'm like, God, how does everybody know my dad? You know, he goes, wait, he goes, all right, you shouldn't be in here, but let me see what you got. I look and he goes, Nick, you have to get a bachelor's in planning to get a master's in planning. I said, well, no, isn't there anything else? He goes, yeah, there's urban geography, urban studies, or planning. That's the 3 things that would qualify you. But you have to have a bachelor's. I said, Doc, here's one part I skipped. I used to be also a professional paddleball player and racquetball player. So I was really good at it. So he was the 55 and older national champion in paddleball. I knew that. So I walked in, I saw a picture on his desk of him holding the trophy. So I could see it in a mirror. It was behind him. I could see the picture. So it sounds like I'm making this up. I swear to God, I'm not. So I looked at him and he said, so we got to get you in planning first. I said, no, you said if I had a geography degree. He goes, yeah. And I said, okay, let's look at my transcripts. I said, dendrology, mensuration, geology. He goes, I said geography. And I said, I know, this says geology. Geo, like geography, geology. I go, come on. I said, you know what? I take the picture. I turn around. I go, you're the national champion in paddleball? He's like, I am. I said, so if I told you I could beat you 21-1 and 21-1, I know from Don Gross, my boss, that you get 1 pick a year to put somebody in a master's program called the President's Pick. I want to be that guy. And I'm going to beat you senseless in paddleball. And if I do, you're letting me in that slot.
Oh, my
And he
goodness.
looks at me, he goes, get out of my office. I thought, it was worth a try. I walk out, and he said, where are you going to play? I said, I play in Taylor. He said, I'll be there at 7 a.m. You're buying the court. That was $14 an hour. I said, okay. We went down there. He never said a word. We walked in. We met at 7 o'clock in the morning. Went to shake his hand, didn't shake my hand. And I'm like, oh, crap. And I was really good at it. So I beat him 21-1 and 21-0. He was flaming, just swearing and smashing this thing against the wall. And he looked at me. We get all done. And I'm like, I can't believe I just beat you that bad. But we shook hands and he goes, I'll see you in my office next Monday. Went down to Wayne State the next Monday after school, after work, and he put me in the program. He said, I'm going to tell you one thing, Nick. I know who your dad is. I respect your dad. You're out of your mind. You're like a crazy person, but I'm going to put everything I got behind you and don't F it up. Don't let me down.
Yeah.
Because I shouldn't let you in this program. I'm going to do it. So it took me 4 years of every night. Karen was wonderful. I'd go to school, work all day. And
So you're doing both. So you're doing full-time plus
and
you were
go
doing
get
school.
my master's. And nobody spoke English back then. And it was a lot of the kids were coming in from Europe to get their degrees in planning, to go back to Europe. So I literally couldn't learn anything from anybody, but Dr. Perlis would say, just read and memorize this stuff and you can get this. So I would do all the projects and I would just do them when these kids didn't know what they were doing. They were there for a different reason. The Chaldeans were coming over from Iraq because of Saddam. And so I was willing to do the work to let them be successful. So I got through it in 1987. I think I got my master's degree. So in the meantime, I'm working as a cartographer. Never to this day, this is something I hope everybody that's a young person does. I never asked for a raise. I never asked for promotion in my entire life. Now, I'm not stupid to know that that doesn't work out for everybody, but I believe, and my dad taught me, and my Uncle Teddy taught me, you bust your butt, someone's going to notice, and they're going to recognize you. Might not be the first minute or the first day or the first month or the first year, but don't waver, never give up, and somebody's going to recognize you. Yeah. So it was a thing. I just would never ask Don for a raise, and now all of a sudden I'm a planning technician. Came in one day, he's like, I made you planning technician. I got another $2 an hour. Is that a job? He said, I just made it up. Then he'd say, okay, now get your master's. So he knew I was going to school, got my master's. The day I got my master's, okay, now you're a planner one. Now you're a real planner. Okay? There are 4 other people in the department ahead of me, way smarter than me. Someday we all thought they wanted to be Don Gross. And Don wasn't that old, but so 87 to 91. So I want
to get back a little bit, just because there's a lot of things that happen there. No, you're good. You're good. And you're very passionate about the story, and I love it. There are so many things that I want to pick apart in this, but the biggest thing that I want to touch on and hear from you, where do you think all this confidence came from in regards to, I could figure it out? Because at the end of the day, we look at everything that you did, you didn't know how to do any of it. Why? What made you so confident, or was it your willingness to, you knew you were going to work harder than everybody else, or what was it about the fact that it didn't matter? You could have been picking flowers. You could have been, it doesn't matter what the job was. You knew that you gave the confidence off that I'm going to be the best that I can be at this, and I'm going to prove it to everybody.
So I'd never, you just made me have a moment that I'd never thought about before. It goes back to when my dad said, you're going to be a toe checker. I looked at the guys getting all the women. They were the lifeguards. I'm like, I got to be a lifeguard. I knew how to swim barely. So I thought, figure out. So the guys, I was a good looking young guy, and I didn't smoke, drink, do drugs, never have. I loved women. We're Romanians. We're gypsies. So they would always take me under the wing like, dude, all right, here's how you become a lifeguard. You're going to fake it if you have to learn. You're going to save someone from the bottom of the pool, and then you can be a lifeguard. And I thought, they're giving me the opportunity to succeed when I don't deserve it. So don't fail. So I was scared to fail.
Yeah.
It pushed me. I never thought about it that way. And then when I got my real estate degree, I'm like, I'm scared I'm going to not be able to get a listing. So I'm just going to stop, take my win, and go to the next thing. And I'm going to wax 9 cars in a day, even though it's taking me 24 hours instead of that. And nothing told me or taught me to be that. It was just like this thing. When I went to college, when I was up at Tech, all the guys on my floor, 60 guys in one dorm, 59 of us were all state something. And we were all poor. So the only way to get a good dinner was to win the steak dinner every quarter. So we'd win basketball, wrestling, hockey. We'd win every intramural thing. And they'd have me play quarterback on the touch football.
Yeah.
Because I had this wicked arm that I could throw the ball 100 miles an hour. And I thought, I'm the skinniest guy. These are big football players. And I'm like, I'm the littlest, scrawniest guys, but they're like, you can do it. Just don't let me down. So they kept pushing me. And I thought, I don't want to embarrass myself in front of other people, no matter what I did, whether it was athletics or taking a test. I didn't want to embarrass myself.
What was the no quit mentality, though? Because at the end, that's the big thing that is so pivotal, right? There's some people that'll get told no 3 times, and they let that continue to tear them down over and over and over again. And what would be some advice that you'd give them in regards to the fact that, I mean, how many things did you try before you started to figure out and started to get momentum towards where you are in your career now?
So I think what you do is you avoid big mistakes. So I think it's okay to be a little bit cocky and a little bit confident.
Yeah.
But don't get too cocky or too confident. Don't look beyond what you think you can handle. Take it in small bites, I guess. So I would look and go, I think I can get a master's. I don't know if I'm smart enough to get a master's. So I had to act like I knew all this planning stuff. So just whatever you do complete work. I tell my staff this today. Just do complete work. Do the best you can, and then let the cards fall where they fall.
Well, you definitely did a good job paying attention to the people that did do it well. If there is one thing that I am noticing in all of the things that you're talking about, it's that you did pay attention to the people that did things the right way and maybe mirrored that in some way. Even though you didn't know how to do it, you trusted that they knew how to do it.
And not one of those, I will tell you this, Don Gross. So I had, in my own planning department, he was the silent genius guy. Never bragged. I hate braggadocious people. And I thought, hate's a bad word, but it because that means they're covering up something. So be real, be honest with yourself, and say, and then don't be afraid to push. I hustled my way through college because I didn't have any money playing pool. Because my dad was an amazing pool player, and he's like, don't use this for the wrong reason. I go, Dad, I want skis. I can't afford them. So I'd go hustle pool. I would watch, and I'd never hustle somebody that I didn't think I could beat. Yeah. So I'd find somebody that had too many drinks or whatever, and I'd get $20 off them. And I thought, I always knew my limit. I thought, I don't ever want to lose. So it's kind of cheating. So I don't pick the biggest challenge. I didn't pick the guy that was the best pool player in the hall. I picked somebody that I knew I could beat. And then I got to that guy. By the time I did, he was already drunk, so I could beat him.
And I just wonder, so I guess I'm trying to get a little deeper into the fact that why was it a necessity for you? Because like I said, there's so many people that have adversity, and it ruins them for the rest of their life. They might end up on the street. They might end up in horrible situations because they ultimately say, I can't do it, right? Why was it a necessity? There was no option that you were going to fail. Why was that?
Because I think I looked at the people around me that I trusted that were successful, and they didn't ever give up. So I'm assuming I never made a conscious decision like I'm going to beat anything.
Yeah.
I just said, whatever I do, I'm going to do the best that I can.
You're never going to quit, though, regardless.
Uncle Joe at Little Bill's place, he'd be like, I told you you'd make it, Nico. He'd call me Nico, too. And it's like, because you never give up. It's like, you're not afraid to get. When I get beat in tennis, it freaked me out. I would just be like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
You could beat me. There's no way. I'll tell you, this is important. Playing paddleball. I played racquetball, so I played at the highest level. This state, this is important now that I think about it. State cop comes in a Little Bill's, shaved head with his hat on, and And he comes in, he goes, hey, I hear there's a guy that's a good racquetball player. And Joe says it's that guy right there, Nick. And the guy comes over and he's intimidating. Chin strap on, bald head, takes off his hat. And he goes, he called him Sergeant or Captain Grabowski. He said, yes, sir. He goes, I have a daughter that plays paddleball and she needs competition. She's about to play in this tournament in Eastern. She's a woman. She's 5'2", and she's going to play against Alvin Porsche and David Purepoy from the Green Bay Packers. I need somebody to push her. So I go, sir, I never played paddleball. He goes, doesn't matter. If you can play racquetball, you can play paddleball. I need you to run her into the ground. And he said, I'm asking you to do this as a favor. My dad's buddy was a cop, a state cop, called him to Paul Pomeroy. He's like, oh, I know, Miss Him, do it. So I met her. She's like, I'm going to run you. I'll murder you. You'll never beat me. And I'm like, this little teeny girl, she was kind of heavy set. I'm like, you're going to, and I was like a wild athlete. I never ran out of energy. And I'm like, you're going to beat me at this paddleball. What is it? She goes, use a paddle and the ball compresses. You go get the ball doesn't come to you like in racquetball. I couldn't get a point off her for 2 weeks. I played every single night and I was getting madder and madder. And I thought, don't give up. She's like, you going to quit yet? I'm like, nope, I'm going to beat you. First, I'm going to get a point off you. Then I'm going to beat you. And her dad was just sitting up there. I remember he'd watch every night until I beat her. And then she never beat me again. And then I was her partner at Eastern. She would run under the legs of these 6'8" football players to make a shot. And they're like, who are you people? You can't beat us. And I think going back to that, even then it was like, I met my match, but if I work hard enough, I can beat her eventually. And everything from then just kept going. Don't give up. Just keep going. You'll eventually figure it out. And you'll figure out a way to beat her.
Yeah. And it's important for people to understand that it seems to me that what you've learned is that the only way that you fail is ultimately if you do quit. If you don't quit, you will figure it out. It's a fact. And you saw it over and over
again.
It.
I agree 100%. I can prove that that's the case. Now, if you take a few steps back, okay, but if you take a leap back, you'll probably never catch up. Once you get your momentum going, that's what I tell kids. You might fail one test, or you might lose one match, or you might do this. I coached hockey, lacrosse my whole life, and we're not always going to win the state title, but when you do, you're going to remember it the rest of your life. So learn from that. Don't dwell on the failures. You're going to fail. I know this is all cliche, like you got to fail to succeed. No, you don't. But the odds are you're going to fail before you succeed.
Yeah.
You just can't. Not everybody wins every single time. So you just keep going. And this is my wrap up of the career to get me to the planning. So they decide to retire Don Gross and say, you're going to be the strategic planner for the city. They had burned him out. And
this was when? Where are we at now?